Hey guys, it's Waifugate, and today I'll be giving you my first impressions on my Thicc Jugg Righteous Fire MF build. So far the build's been a blast, and I've easily farmed up quite a few of the key pieces vital to the character. The leveling process was a bit rough because I didn't anticipate the impact of Rage, the new mechanic from Berserker, on sustaining RF. Instead of sticking with the original plan of Zerker, RF, MF, we settled on Jugg. So far, this build is similar to my Righteous Fire Magic Find Pathfinder from Abyss League. Thus far, Jugg feels tankier and offers more in terms of area of effect and positioning on the skill tree. The idea here is simple. We Righteous Fire, and we obtain as much item quantity as we can within reason. This build is tankier than pretty much any other MF character, because to scale damage, we have to scale HP. So we'll be moving right into the gear. With our Flask up, our Divination Distillate, we have 57 increased item quantity and 45% rarity. Now, so far with the items, I've settled on an Elder helmet so far. So we have a few options here. We can go Elder with increased burning. We can go Elder with Conk effect increased burning. We can go Shaper with increased AoE. And all of these choices impact our gem links that we decide to put in our helmet. And I'll be going over that more later on. But to start with, you just want like any helmet pretty much. You don't have to get an Elder or any of that. You just need to have something to put your Righteous Fire in. That could be your chest piece as well. It just depends on like what you get as you're leveling up. It'll determine where you put your stuff, right? Happens like pretty much every time you level. Now, as far as the shield is concerned, we've got Rise of the Phoenix. I think this is pretty much best in slot. We could go for a Safel's Frame for 4% max res, but we don't really make use of the increased spell damage off of that. And we can't block normal attacks. It's sort of a downer. You know, there are just a few options here, but I think that Rise of the Phoenix, or perhaps maybe a Shaper or Elder shield with plus max res would be good with more HP or something. But for now, like, you know, Rise of the Phoenix is super solid and relatively cheap a little bit later into the league. I think I paid 10C for this. I paid like 6C for this helmet. Like, it wasn't anything too special. It just gave me a 5 link. So as far as the boots are concerned, pretty much only one option here for Magic Find, and that's Goldworm. Now you can get up to a 20% roll on these. The fire res does not matter because no matter what you do, you will have so much fire res at the end of the day because of Purity of Fire. So Goldworm, a little bit low on the move speed, but overall a great pair of boots for item quantity, especially since Bisco's got nerfed. We've got to make up for that somehow as a Magic Find build. Other options pretty much include Calm's Roots, and that's it. So if you want more damage and a little less item quantity, it's actually like a lot less item quantity. 18%, 20% is pretty much the biggest roll you can get now, because Bisco's is kind of, you know, it's not as good. Yeah. As far as the belt goes, I like Perandus Blazon. 8% item quantity, 20% flask duration, and up to 30 attributes. The attributes doesn't matter that much, but we do struggle with dex. So getting 30 instead of like 22, for example, can make the difference of 1 or 2 joules with dex if you have to go that far as to use joules to cap your dex to get that faster attacks. Gloves. Gloves, normally we would use Sedima's Touch on a Magic Find build. But I think that, you know, it's just not that good with Righteous Fire because we ruin our elemental equilibrium. And speaking of that, these gloves are giving us our proc for elemental equilibrium. So whenever we shield charge into something, we deal 1 to 15 lightning damage, right? And then after that, if they take lightning damage with elemental equilibrium, they lose cold res and fire res, 50%. So it's just a huge buff for us. Works on bosses as well for that Atlas completion. I think generally speaking, I'll probably skip the boss. Maybe I can do like T9 or T10s without even like losing that much time. We'll have to see how the build shapes up. So far, it's doing pretty well on bosses. So I'm being optimistic. Brightbeak, pretty much best in slot if you want to push those higher tier maps or do the boss. faster. I would say you could replace this with a scepter with like fire damage, attack speed, burning damage, just any combination, elemental damage, anything that brings up your righteous fire damage, any of those tags. But I think just getting a high lightning res roll on a bright beak is good. Once again, we don't care about the fire res, right? We got enough of that. So as for rings, I would like 2 Ventors or a white pariah. I think white pariah with purity of fire in it would be really good. We'll go over that more with the gem links. But for now, I just got a 60 life roll. It's got a little bit of res. It's giving me 7 dex with that 7 all attributes roll for faster attacks. It's not really anything special, but it is giving us a little bit of life. So that's nice. We'll probably lose most of that when we switch to a Ventors, or all of that when we switch to our white pariah, though. Over here we have the Ventors that I picked up. I think I paid like 20C for this. And so it gives us a little bit of life, gives us that increased item quantity. And pretty much with these, when you go to Ventor Hunt, you want to prioritize ones with negative fire res. And that's because most people think, well, I mean, this is the general concept, right? If it has a negative res, it's a bad Ventors, or it's less worthwhile. So you can kind of get a good Ventors for this build because the negative fire res is like not a lost stat. Like it doesn't matter what that is. That could pretty much be negative 40, and like you could probably tank the hit to it because like your fire res is just so big. Maybe not 40. 40 is like a lot, but like 30, 20, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then what I want to do is I want to get like 1 positive with lightning like this one, and my other Ventors have like a positive with like cold or something, like just to balance out my 2 worst reses. Once I get a pariah, I'm going to have to balance my reses via jewels like this one, or like this one with an all res roll, but we'll go over that stuff later with the gearing and whatnot. So as for the amulet, we've got a 6% quantity here. Now this was like 10C for me. The other ones were a little pricier on the market. So just pick up what you can in this slot, whether that's the ascetic, whether that's Biscos, if you happen to chance one, if you happen to find one, wear it anyway. You know, and if you go with ascetic, you'll have to get like a magic helmet and roll it yourself, maybe with like increased burning damage, or a shaper with increased AoE, and then maybe like a, you know, a life roll or something, or a res roll. Whatever you can do, man, to make the ascetic go online. Ascetic gives you up to 15% item quantity if you have a magic item on. And I think the helmet's the easiest one to roll up, because everything else we have to sacrifice clear speed or something. And like, you know, the gloves need the insanity roll for attack speed, so like that's important, you know, just for clear speed. And then the chest, of course, is going to be Calm's Heart, because we're righteous fire life based. Don't worry too much about that fire roll right off the bat. Just try to get it around 30% if you can. If you can't afford the divine orbs or whatever, don't sweat it. Just use whatever Calms you have. So yeah, that's what I would do. Priorities, probably like basic magic find gear, so gold worm, Parandus, maybe a ring or something. Then try to get a cheap helmet with like increased burning or increased AoE. And then try, like, you know, Bright Beak, Rise of the Phoenix. Like, you gotta have that stuff too, like Rise. You want to make sure you're sustaining your RF first, so Rise is probably more important than the MF stuff, even though the MF stuff is quite vital to the build. Divination Distillate also, as far as gear goes, this is a big one. Like, get this as soon as you can, because this will help you sustain while you're leveling up as well, as soon as you take your Mind Over Matter Keystone. Alright, so speaking of the flasks, that's what we'll go over now. So we've got a basalt here with warding. I would like this to be a chemist with 23% or higher reduction to charges. And it's a warding because I don't like to deal with temporal chains, vulnerability, especially like any of those things are just going to ruin our day for map mods. So this is just really important. It's not vital to get this ASAP, because like your first few maps that you roll, you're not really going to deal with curses. Like your tier 1 through 4 is like not really going to deal with that much if you happen to get it, if it's even on the roll tables that low. I haven't paid attention to that. But even if it is on that, it's like one alteration to get rid of it, right? So like it is important later on though. Very vital. Now, Quicksilver of Heat. My OCD tells me that I want my heat on my ruby flask and my adrenaline roll on my Quicksilver. But as long as you have an adrenaline and a heat flask, you'll be fine. I'd like an experimenters, doesn't really matter. I was low on alts, so I just stopped on that. Same thing with this. Experimenters would have been better, but we settled for perpetual. So just, you know, adrenaline, heat, and curse. Those are your three main ones. And we've got the divination distillate. This can go up to 18%. I picked this up for 2C equiv as I was leveling just to get it online faster. But you know, try to shoot for that 18. 16 is like the lowest I would go for a starter. Then I've got a Seething Divine Life Flask of Staunching. Now the only important part about this is the staunching. In a perfect world, I would run like an Eternal Flask that's catalyzed staunching, or like, you know, a bubbling or something. I think Eternal is better for bubbling and catalyzed, whereas Seething, the Divine excels at the Seething Flasks. I think that's how it breaks down. I'll have to do some research before I roll, but other than that, that's how I roll my flasks. All right, so gem links. So let's start with the helmet since it's probably the most complex. So I talked earlier about different options that you had, like increased AoE, conk effect, and increased burning damage, all of this other stuff, right? So here are your options. You've got a trade-off every time you use one of these helmets. You either have to use conk effect, which lowers your AoE of your Righteous Fire. If you do that, you need increased AoE in your gem link setup somewhere to make up for it. And with Juggernaut, we do get some good AoE per endurance charge, and that is up 100% of the time. But it's still, like, I think my end game, what I'm going to lean toward, is going to be a Shaper helmet with, so Shaper helmets are going to have increased AoE, right? So I'll have Righteous Fire, I'll have not increased AoE, I'll have Elemental Focus, Efficacy, and then Burning Damage in a Shaper helmet. And I want that Shaper helmet to have a Horror roll with an Essence, right? So it gives 30% more elemental damage. And I'll use that as my pseudo conk effect. Now, the best helmet in the world is probably Horrorcraft Elder with conk effect, burning damage, and then you put all of the other supports in, right? So you get like a crazy multiplier. You just get the best multipliers in the world. But that's like quite a few exalts crafting. Like, and you have to use an Essence of Horror here and there until you hit certain things, and then, but that's like going off topic, sort of. Basically, you've got some options with your helmet. If you have one with just burning damage, this is what I prefer to do. I like Righteous Fire, Efficacy, increased AoE, and Elemental Focus. You could change out Efficacy for conk effect for more damage and to get used to the conk effect. I really didn't like it, which is why I'm leaning toward the increased AoE from a Shaper helmet. But that's what I'm using right now. You just have to juggle the supports with Righteous Fire until you find something really nice. And the shield, we have Blasphemy, Flammability, and then we have Purity of Fire. Now, we talked about options before with the Pariah Ring, putting the Purity of Fire in Pariah so it gets +2 levels. That increases our max res, and that's pretty good. If that would happen, I would juggle some other stuff. So, cast when damage taken, Immortal Call, and increased duration. Pretty simple. Kind of a high level cast when damage taken, just so we're not casting it all the time, right? It's not triggering all the time. And then I have a portal here just so I don't have to purchase portal scrolls ever. This is a choice, it's quality of life, it's preference. So if I could put Purity of Fire in a Pariah Ring, right? I'd put my portal here, and then I would put Blood Rage here. And Blood Rage interacts with our Pantheons. We'll go over that in a little bit. But Blood Rage is very good. It gives us % increased attack speed, it gives us frenzy charges, which gives us more attack speed, and it gives us more damage, 4% per. So that's like 12% more damage. It makes up for a lot of stuff. Like once we make this trade-off, it's actually really good. But only after you can sustain Righteous Fire 100%, like, and you feel tanky as fuck, and then you still feel tanky as fuck after you put on Blood Rage. Those are the conditions, and you have to have a Pariah Ring. So like Stars and Moon align, you can make that change. As far as the shield charge goes, now this is a variable. So right now I have shield charge, blood magic, increased crit strikes, and faster attacks. Now I would not take increased critical strikes until I had undeniable, which is Uber Lab. So not until Uber Lab, okay? And until you get your Uber Lab done, right, you use Fortify here instead of increased crit strikes. Because you're not going to proc Elemental Overload. You don't need Elemental Overload until you have your Uber Lab and until you have increased crit strikes on your shield charge. So, and then faster attacks. And then we put that into the Insanity Gloves for more attack speed. Best in slot here is going to be an Eldercraft with socketed faster attacks. So you have faster attacks on your gloves. Then you would have increased crit strikes, blood magic, shield charge, and fortify. And that would just make us tankier. I opt, since I'm in softcore, for increased crit strikes here with the Uber Lab. If I were in hardcore, I would take Unrelenting, and I would just drop Elemental Overload off the tree. I'd just rely on Elemental Equilibrium for damage, and possibly get a Scorching Ray set up for single target. In the Brightbeak, we have Flame Dash, Enduring Cry, and Blood Magic. So the reason why we have Blood Magic on this and here is because with Divination Distillate, here, I'll show you guys. So if we use this, right, and then we tap our Distillate, our mana is still draining, which means that our Flask effect stays up. If we didn't have Mind Over Matter, right, which takes 30% of our Righteous Fire damage and puts it toward mana, our mana would go up. Therefore, once it gets to the top, it would cut it off. The Flask effect would stop. So we're able to get a little bit of MF because of this, and max res. So 4% max res, and we've got our Ruby Flask. We're sitting at 94% fire res. And that's without a good purity of fire, right? In a Pariah Ring. We'd even have more than that. And the more fire res you get, the more apt you are at like being able to use Blood Rage or something else. Like, it makes things easier. It makes you tankier. And that's it for the links. So next we'll be going over the skill tree and like reses and such. So our reses, as you can see, even with endurance charges, so endurance charges give us 4% res per, right? Even with 7 of those, we're still at like 70% cold res. So I'm not capped yet. To cap, I need to get one more level so I can assign another jewel socket here and get like another one of these. 1 to 2 of these jewels, or jewels with cold res and lightning res, and then all res. Those are our best. This is a really good jewel. I had a nice regal on this one. It was fire damage and res. Got really lucky with the regal. This regal, not so much, but I'm still going to use it because my resources are a little limited right now after getting my gear ups and whatnot. And see, we're close to another jewel socket here. But that's it for the reses, pretty much. You just got to cap it with diamond skin. Sometimes you have to take 1 or 2 of these nodes here. Like I could take this node and, you know, help the lightning res. You know, that's sort of beyond the point. So as far as the skill tree goes, leveling up, you can go Sunder and go melee damage, and spec out of it later. In my forum build guide, I actually have details on how to level and whatnot, just different options you have. If you're interested in that, it'll be in a link below. But as far as the actual skill tree goes, I prioritize getting life regen, so I would go from here down to here, get this life regen, get Golem's Blood. You pick this up along your way. Then I would come up here. I wouldn't fill all of this out, I'd just path through it. Get this life regen because it's good. Up here, maybe grab quick recovery, maybe go Sanctity. Burning damage, fire damage, regen with fire damage, max fire res here. Like, you get the point. And then, like, you want to get life regeneration 0.2% as soon as you get your Juggernaut Ascendancy. If you want to switch to Righteous Fire, getting Unflinching and this Endurance Charge cluster here on top of this is very vital in order to switch. And I wouldn't recommend switching until you get Unflinching and Unbreakable. So probably Normal Lab and then Cruel Lab. And then for Merc Lab, go Unyielding, I think. So, and then save this for Uber once you actually want Overload. Don't spec Overload until you have this once again. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the skill tree. It's pretty simple. We spec life, regen. We don't go AoE because we get so much as Juggernaut, and so that saves us, like, you know, 2 points, because we could spec 3 here, spec 1 out of here, but we save 2 points, and we're able to maybe get a jewel socket because of stuff like that. Now, moving along to Pantheons. We've got Soul of Arakali. So this one, even at base value, like before the improvements, right? 5% reduced damage taken from damage over time is super nice. Like, it just makes it easier to sustain Righteous Fire, right? And then we also get 50% increased recovery rate of life if you've stopped taking damage over time recently. So this is important when we go to swap to using Blood Rage, right? So Immortal Call procs, it stops our Blood Rage from damaging us, and then we get 50% increased recovery rate of life, which is just insane. It turns, you know, the hindrance of Blood Rage into a buff even. So it's just really, really good later on. And it's even good to start off with, just so you can start sustaining Righteous Fire. And then we've got Soul of Shikari. This just gives us 5% reduced chaos damage taken, and it makes those chaos clouds less detrimental to our map running. Once we capture Terror of the Infinite Drifts, we will also be immune to poison. I haven't really prioritized that. You know, once I get around to it, it'll be good. So overall, the build is it's going to be a tanky build that smashes shaped volcanoes and shaped channel maps. I don't plan on taking it too far into red maps. If I have to get other Shaper's Orbs, maybe. And toward the end of the build, I might try to push bosses with it, kind of peel back on the Magic Find gear and get some other type of a farm going. But for now, that's the goal, is just T9, T10 maps. And I'll just keep improving the build, like I said, like the White Pariah ring, everything else. I'll be doing another video once I get gear ups, and once I feel like the build has progressed enough to validate another video. And with that, I hope you guys enjoy the build, and if you try it out, let me know how you like it, and maybe if you have any ideas for improvements or different options, maybe something that I missed, you know, feel free to leave that in the comments too, man. I appreciate it, guys, and I will catch you all later in the next video.